back again. I'm calling this my third installment of my pocket knife video. I'm going to show some traditional knives today, which is one of my favorites. And I think you should still own and carry traditional knives from time to time. I like the history, and so we'll talk a little bit about that today. I'm actually out in our Airbnb because all my family's home, but we have a little Airbnb next to our house that we rent out. So if you're ever in Idaho, need a place to stay, look up the Country Lake House in Heyburn, Idaho, and see if we're available for the night. This might be my last video for a little while. I know I'm hit and miss and I go a long time without posting, but you know I love humor, and I'm in a community theater production of Spamalot, which is the stage performance of Monty Python's Quest for the Holy Grail, classic comedy movie. And so I'm excited to be in that, but it's going to take a lot of my evenings and a lot of my spare time the next couple months as we rehearse for that. Well, I don't have quite as many knives in this video as I did in my folding knife video. I'll try to save some of the better ones for the last. I think we'll start out with some of the smaller knives, some pen knives, work up to some Stockman and Trapper knives and Barlow knives. And I have a couple that you might find interesting. Anyways, let's get started. So, you know, some of the first recorded record of a folding knife is like from 600 AD. You know, knives have been around forever, but fixed blades are much older than folding knives. It took some technological advancements to make a knife that could fold into a pocket and still be comfortable. Some of the earliest ones were gravity knives. Well, not gravity knives. Those were early ones, but friction folders. And those are still pretty common today. Peasant knives, friction folders. You know, you'll see a lot of those around. This one I picked up at kind of an antique store. It's an Albert Oates Sheldon knife. An Albert Oates Sheldon knife, made in the UK, I think in Sheffield. Back in the day, Sheffield produced some pretty good steel, some pretty good knives out of England. I don't know that the quality today is as good as it was back in the old day when they had some good steel smiths and some good steel mills there. This one's kind of interesting. It has a hawk bill or a pruning type blade, which you think about what the peasants would be doing. They would be harvesting grapes, harvesting you know, produce, working out in the fields, trimming trees, gardening. So a pruning blade would probably work great, especially if you're cutting grapes to make wine or whatever. So this is a friction folder. There's no locking mechanism, no slip joint. The only thing that's holding it open is you putting your thumb there on the spine or gripping it. That will keep it from closing, but otherwise it could close and cut your hand. So not the greatest knife. Then not that long ago, but in late 1800s, they started to invent slip joint knives. So that's where you start to get you know, this spring on the back of the spine that helps keep the knife open. And a lot of the smaller knives were called pen knives, and that's because people back then didn't have pencil sharpeners. You know, they carried around a pencil or a quill or something to write with, and it would have to be sharpened. And so the gentleman would have a pen knife to sharpen their pencils or their pens. And so they came in little varieties. They have a lot of different, slip joints have a lot of different patterns. A lot of them are named after the handle shape, actually. Nowadays, we identify knives by their blade shape more than their handle shape. But back in the day, they identified a lot of knives by their handle shape. This is just a small slip joint knife called a Texas toothpick. It's what most people refer to these as nowadays. I've never used it as a toothpick to pick my teeth, but it's a small, you know, got a colored rosewood handle. These are relatively inexpensive, but a cool little Texas toothpick. You know, you can pick these things up. You can buy $4 or $5 a lot of times. You can get a graving on them or whatever. They make good little gifts. Here's another small pen knife by Buck. I don't know if this one has a specific model name. A lot of them are identified by numbers. 379. So just a clip point blade. Clip points were by far the predominant blade on most of these slip joint knives, although they had different blades with different things. This one has a G10 handle, so a little bit more modern than the wooden or bone handles, the jig bone that you would see, but still a nice small little pen knife. Not a great quality steel. A lot of these small buck knives have like a 3CR or a real basic, 400 series stainless steel. But a handy little knife to throw in your pocket. You don't very often have to sharpen pencils anymore, but that's what these pen knives were originally used for. Here's a Remington Bandit, and there was a whole series of Bandit knives. This is the small pen one. I picked this up at a thrift store. I wish I had some of the other ones because I believe these probably came out in the 80s, and it has a black Derlin handle with gold on it, and it reminds me of Smokey and the Bandits. Trans Am is, the car that he drove in that movie with the black and the gold and the Bandit name. I almost think that's what they were styling it after. Again, another small clip point blade. Some of the really long clip points, I think were called a California clip point or maybe a rat tail clip point. They had really a long clip on the end of them, more than just a short clip that we see on a lot of more modern clip points. Here's just a couple interesting ones, a little bit bigger than pen knives. These ones you could buy in thrift shops all the time back in the day. A friend of mine actually gave me these two. This one's got a Zorro theme on it, but this is actually a USA made knife. I think it says stamped USA. It's the Pop Knife Company, has a fairly substantial clip point on there, and something a little bit bigger than a pen knife would have a lot of times been called a jackknife. There's some debate about where that term came from. There was a French designer named Jacques that maybe that came from. There's also in historical writings jack-legged knives. They were called jack-legged knives. Some people would say it looked like a person's leg. You were folding it into a leg, or maybe you're putting it in the pocket of your leg. So jack-legged knives. Here's another one with Cy Young on it. This one, interestingly enough, is not a USA made. This one says it's made in Ireland, so probably coming out of that Sheffield steel there. This one is still new and in the package, but it was part of a collection of baseball players. And so these knives have been around for a long time, and they were collectible. A lot of people would collect them and things like that. So the terms pen knife, jackknife, pocket knife, those are all kind of used interchangeably when you're talking about these old type of knives. Jackknife also, some people say, might have come from sailors who were sometimes called jacks, and they would carry a knife, so it's a jack's knife. I'm not exactly sure. You can go to Wikipedia and search that stuff up. Now we'll look at some Stockman knives. This is an old timer, 89 OT, I believe it is. If you ever find 890 T, if you ever find one of these are really great knives. Schrade, USA made. You can see the tips worn off of this one. It's had a lot of use. The Stockman pattern usually consists with 3 blades. This one's a little unusual in that it has a serrated sheep's foot blade, a clip point blade, and a more blunt tip spay blade. And a lot of people, I live in cattle country, a lot of dairies, a lot of farms, and people carry these knives around still. In fact, they're the most common type of knife, I would say, still in this area. A lot of people will carry a big one on a sheath or one just like this in their pocket. And this is a great knife, high carbon steel. You can sharpen the heck out of it and it'll last a long time. USA made back when Schrade was doing good quality. I really like this one. So the interesting thing about Stockman blades, here's another one. This one's from Boker Tree Brand. It's also a Stockman pattern. So it has a nice clip point blade there. And this 3-blade pattern was referred to as the Stockman. So this one has the sheep's foot blade and the spay blade. And if you think about the stuff that cattle people would do, that you start to understand why they would have these 3 blades. So the clip point blade is kind of their everyday use knife for whatever they're doing. The sheep's foot blade, some people think that it's called a sheep's foot blade because it's kind of rounded and looks maybe like the hoof of a sheep. But actually what those were designed for was to trim hooves on animals. So if you've been around animals, you know their hooves continue to grow, and sometimes they can get too long. And so you would use this to kind of shave down their hoof. And so that's what the sheep's foot blade was for. And then the spay blade, if you were working with animals, sometimes you need something with more of a blunt tip that's not going to puncture or injure something. Most commonly what spay blades were used for was for neutering animals, spaying and neutering animals. It's spelled different, S-P-E-Y, not S-P-A-Y, but it was used for, on the Stockman knives at least, that's what it was used for. You can also use it when you're preparing game. A lot of times you don't want a sharp tip knife to go through the hide of the animal or the organs, so you would use more of a spay tip blade. Here's a case example of a trapper. I believe this is a red bone. It's got a jigged bone handle. It's also got a clip point blade and a sheep's foot and a spay blade. So same pattern. You can see there were knives with 4 blades that I believe is called a Congress or a Senator pattern. And you'll see on these knives, a lot of times they were defined by the handle shape. So you can see how this one is kind of a serpentine or S-shaped pattern. And so that would be a serpentine handle. I've got one that's a little more pronounced, but there were canoe handles, which I've got an example of that. Rifle stock handles that look like the stock of a gun. I had one of those, but I don't know if I brought it out. A good example. So a lot of them were named after the handle shape. Here's one more Stockman knife. This one is a Gerber. This was kind of a fancier anniversary edition. I had this for a long time. I don't remember exactly when I got it, but it must have been in the late 90s, early 2000s. This one, actually, the clip point blade on it is locking. So this one has a lock back. So the slip joints originally did not have locking blades. But you do get some protection from that back spring on there to keep it from closing. This one has a spay blade and a sheep's foot blade as well. So it's that 3-blade Stockman pattern. This one had elk ivory, I believe, on it. Really nice example of a Stockman knife, and had some engraving on the bolsters there. Here is another example. This is a Boker knife as well, but this one's the small Stockman pattern. So, and this one's got an interesting tool on it too. You can see here's 2 Bokers side by side. The one on the bottom is the larger pattern, and then this one on the top is a smaller pattern. So you can see it's a smaller knife, about a 1/2 inch shorter, and the blades are a lot thinner on it. It has a clip point blade, a spay blade, and it has this interesting tool on it. I don't think that is a file. It looks more like a reamer. but it's not very sharp anymore. It probably needs to be sharpened up. But the way it looks on the back, it looks like it's a reamer. So that's kind of interesting to see a different blades type on a Stockman knife. Here's a Winchester. So if you're looking at a lot of these older slip joint knives, they've been around forever. A lot of companies make them, and there's a lot of modern interpretations too. Jack Wolf Knives, is making some modern interpretations on these. But if the traditional patterns are from Buck, Case, Camillus. Camillus is one of the oldest, I think the oldest knife company in the United States. And Boker, those are ones that are still dominating these slip joint categories. This small serpentine Stockman from Winchester, same blade configuration. You can really kind of see the serpentine shape on that blade handle. Coffin handle was another handled style. You would see that more on fixed blades, like a Bowie knife, coffin handled Bowie. But they were designed a lot, or they were identified a lot by their handle shape. So now we'll go into trapper knives, and a trapper knife generally has two blades. Here's kind of a stereotypical trapper knife from Boker. This one has two blades, a clip point, and it has a really long spade blade. See that? So it's a little bit different than the Stockman. It does not have the sheep's foot blade. It just has these two bigger blades. And you think about what a trapper might be doing with a knife. He's mostly harvesting skins, harvesting animals. And so he's got the long clip point for most uses. And then also when he's processing hides, he's probably going to want something like that spade blade that's a little blunter on the tip, good for trimming fat and stuff off the hides. Here's one I've had for a really long time, a Schrade. This is an old Schrade, USA made. Schrade Plus. It's got a scrimshaw. What the sailors would do is they would put ivory on there, a lot of times whale ivory, walrus tusks, any kind of ivory like that, and they would carve on it. So this one has some trout on it. This one actually has an interesting kind of liner lock, kind of an early slip joint type liner lock. And so you push that over, a little stiff, and then you can disengage it. This only has this would be a trapper knife, but it only has a clip point. It doesn't have the spade blade. It's interesting because of that liner lock, the blade's kind of pushed to one side. It's not really centered. But this is a cool knife, and I've had this in my tackle box for years. I bought this probably 25 years ago and had it in my tackle box for a long time. Would use it when I was out fishing to gut and fillet fish. So those are kind of trapper knives. These ones, you can see how that might be called a rifle stock pattern. I've seen a lot of rifle stocks that's a little bit more square on the butt end there, and that looks a little bit more like a rifle stock. But that would be an example. Now here's another example that's a little bit different. This is a canoe shape pattern. You see the bolsters there, the brass bolsters. This is a buck canoe pattern. This one has two blades, both drop point. They're both drop point. Just a large and a small drop point pattern, and jigged bone on the handles. It's kind of a cool knife. I like the canoe shape. It does well to hold on to. None of these have really big substantial hands. That's kind of a modern, or handles. That's kind of a modern ergonomic thing. Here's a little bit more modern take on a slip joint knife. This is one by Elk Ridge. And you can see it's got multiple types of handle materials there. So you've got some wood, and then you've got some Durlin, and then probably a nickel bolster there. A lot of these older knives had bolsters because they were that was to strengthen the knife. I mean, they're pinned together; they're not screwed together like modern construction. And your pivot was often done in metal when the rest of the handle was in wood or bone or something softer, and so that was to provide it some extra strength. This one also has a lock back. Lockbacks really became popular in the 50s. I would say Buck was the pioneer in mass producing those with the Buck 110 and some other knives, but they really mass produced those knives. So the first year they made the Buck 10, I think they made 100 knives was all that they made the first year, the Buck 110. The next year, I believe it was like 10,000. So, you know, it really took off in sales, and then they were doing 100,000 a year. And so there were locking knives before that, but they were kind of custom. Buck was really the first one to pioneer those mass-produced knives. Maybe I'll show you that because I've got a Buck 110 here. So you can still get these. They're still really popular. They still make a lot of them. I added the thumb stud on it. That's aftermarket. Got it from Amazon. But you can see that the brass bolsters, the wooden handle, the big clip point blade. That's typical for Buck. For the Buck 110, USA made right here in Idaho. Everybody's got to have a Buck, but they're solid, they're sturdy. I've taken it hunting a few times, but it's just more heavy than I want to carry. But I keep it because I like it. It's a good collector's piece. Here's one I showed in a short the other day that I got recently. This is kind of a modern interpretation. This is a clone, basically, Elite Knife Company, a clone of the Buck 112 Auto. So if you're familiar with the Buck automatic knives, they have a shield that you push in the center of the knife that launches the blade. The frustrating thing about Bucks and this clone is you cannot close the knife by pushing that same shield. You have to go to the back lock to disengage the blade and close it. So it's one hand opening, but two hand closing. And this one's got nice G10 inlays, nickel bolsters. This would be a copy or a clone of the Buck 112 Auto, which is a very expensive, very nice knife. This one is a little bit cheaper materials. I think it's 440C, just not the same quality or heat treatment that you would get on a Buck knife. But it's also a quarter of the cost. And I bought that at an auction for $15. I didn't buy it direct from Amazon, although I've seen them on Amazon for about $35. Here's one. This is a little bit more modern, but it's a discontinued model. I included it with my traditional knives. I just barely got this last week. So my son works at a thrift store, and I was in there visiting with him and checking out what they had in their antique cabinet, and they had this Schrade Outback. So it has a nylon sheath, really like a 90s tactical style knife. But I would still call this a traditional knife because it doesn't have a pocket clip. It's designed to be carried on a sheath. It doesn't have thumb studs to be opened. It does have thumb nail nicks. I would say that's more like a thumb nail nick, like you would see on a slip joint knife, and it's a lock backing knife. So this has rubberized handle. I've tried to open it one-handed, but it's kind of a bugger. I don't think it can really be deployed on that. But when you have it in your grip, these rubberized handles feel great, and it feels like they really put a lot of design into this knife. Because it orients it forward like a stabbing pistol type grip. And it's a big chunky knife with a big chunky handle. And I could really see this working well in tactical situations other than the slow deployment. It takes a little while to get this out of the knife. It's the Schrade SG7 Outback USA made knife. I looked on eBay. There's still quite a few of them on there. I paid $12 for it at the thrift store, but I saw some on eBay for $25, $30. So that was kind of a cool find the other day. This is one I like that I found at a pawn shop. And this is also a Schrade, I believe. Yep, Schrade, Wallen, New York. This is their large hunter. This thing's huge. I mean, it's equivalent in size to the Buck 110, which I'll get it out to compare. But this is a trapper style. They're calling it a hunter, but it's a 2-blade trapper essentially. And it is about, I'm not being very safe here because I'm getting my Buck out to compare. It's basically the same size as the Buck knife, except it's got 2 blades. They're non-locking, but you can see that clip point is very similar to the Buck. But I just think this is a heck of a cool knife. It was pretty beat up. I cleaned it up some, but I left a lot of the patina on still. The jig bone handles were a little dinged up, but it cleaned up pretty nice. Carbon steel will patina like that, especially if it's kept in a leather sheath, and that sheath had deteriorated quite a bit. I put a little polish on it to restore it some, but kind of a cool old knife as well. Now we'll go into, I've just got a few left, so if you're hanging in there still. This is not an old model by any means, but this is an old timer knife, not a USA made one, but this is a whittler. So it has all kinds of implements on it for whittling. It's got little chisels, little small blades, scoops, all kinds of things to clean out and when you're whittling. And so I've actually used this to make some spoons and whatnot, and it's kind of a fun little tool. They're pretty inexpensive. I know you can get them on Amazon. I'm not sure, probably other places like Knife Center or Blade HQ as well, anywhere that would carry old timer knives. But that's kind of fun to have some different implements besides just a blade to whittle. And those little scoops and things really make it nice when you're carving out a spoon or a bowl or something rounded. This one I added to my cart kind of as a whim when I was on Knife Center. Just needed to add a couple more things to get that free shipping. And this is, let me see what the brand is again. Balade Papagayo, I think, something like that. Of course, I got the pink one. I don't know why I love girly colors on knives, but this was interesting to me. I think it was about $6, and it's a slip joint knife, but it's pretty solid. I mean, as far as slip joints go, locking up, a $6 knife, it has these rubberized handles, and this is probably the only slip joint knife with a nail nick that I've seen that I can open one-handed. That's crazy. And it's a pretty nice knife. It came nice and sharp, and for $6, I wasn't disappointed in that at all. Here's another more modern pocket knife. This one's also by Boker, Magnum brand. This would be a I don't know what you would call this. It's kind of a rifle stock type pattern. With a drop point knife. So instead of a clip point, which is common on a lot of these older slip joints, this one has a drop point. It's a really nice knife. The micarta on this feels great. And so if you like having a traditional knife, but with some more modern materials, handle materials, this is a really cool option. It's non-locking. So it is a slip joint, doesn't have a pocket clip or anything like that. The one thing I forgot to mention when we were talking about, I'll do that in a minute here. I could have put this in my multi-tool video because it is technically a multi-tool. This is a little CRKT slip joint knife, non-locking. that I got from Knife Center. And this one has a shotgun choke tool in it. So it's kind of a universal shotgun choke tool, and it has a small drop point blade. My only gripe is that the tools on it are really hard to open. You got to have tough nails to get those, which is true of a lot of old slip joints. And it has a bottle opener too, or cap lifter, I guess. And some, those look like they could be wrench tools inside there. And you could use that tip as a flathead screwdriver. So kind of a multi-combination tool. This does work. I have a Beretta 12 gauge semi-auto, Mossberg 20 gauge pump, and a 410 shotgun revolver, and I use that on all of them to change the chokes. I keep it in my range bag. It's a little heavy, but it because it's all stainless steel. Here's kind of a more modern interpretation of a Barlow 2. This is a really relatively inexpensive one from Smith and Wesson. I would probably take the pocket clip off of this because it's tip down carry anyways, but I would probably take the pocket clip off of this one, but it's not bad looking. Black Friday special, like $11. I think they're closer to 20 regularly, but it has a nice sheep's foot blade that's really hollow ground, so it is slicey, and I really like the blade on it. I do not like the liner lock. It's hard to get to, and it's really hard to engage. But it is assisted opening, not great action, but you get what you pay for. And I did order a new Barlow knife the other day. I was at a store, and they had a James brand Wayland knife in there on clearance for like $130, and that's normally a nearly $200 knife. And so I was tempted to buy it. I was looking at it, and then I went on James Brand's website and found out they were having a semi-annual sale, and they had versions of the Wayland on there. It was a different version. It had a lighter maple on it instead of a darker wood, but they had that or a G10 version for $99, and it's an S35V Barlow knife. And so Barlow has an interesting history because the Barlow knives was a knife pattern that was really invented in America and became popular in America. And so that's why you hear so much about Barlow knives. I've got one last knife to show you, and then we'll get to the joke. This is a Buck Yachtsman, and these are really interesting. I picked this up at a knife store. It was used. It's the Buck 315 Yachtsman, I think. USA made. It was actually, when I did some history, I found it was made by Schrade, and it has a Derlin handle and this awesome, very thick, very good quality sheep's foot blade there. And so these were designed to be used by people out in the water, sailors, and for cutting rope and getting into those things. And that's why it has a marlin spike on it. So this is a locking implement that you would use to get knots apart. So if you can imagine when you tie a rope to a sail and that wind is pulling on that rope, it's going to get really tight knots. And so you can use this marlin spike to get into those knots and pull them apart when you need to. And it is locking. You have to use this little extension there to close the marlin spike. You could probably attach a lanyard to that. I believe this is some kind of a tool that they also used in sailing, some kind of a key for grabbing onto and adjusting something. I'm not a sailor, but that's what I believe that is for. This is a really cool knife, discontinued. When I was doing the research, I found that these were made by Schrade and stamped with Buck's name. So Schrade also had versions of the Yachtsman and different things out there. So that's really cool. That's basically what I wanted to show you today as far as my traditional knives go. Thanks for sticking around. Here's your joke for the day, since we were talking about farmers and and whatnot, stockmen, trappers. Here's a little farm humor for you. What did one Dorito farmer say to the other Dorito farmer? Cool Ranch.